Welcome to the show, Ziyaad. How are you doing?
I'm doing super well. I just woke up an hour ago, so I'm good to go.
For context, it's like 6 o'clock in the evening.
Well,
Almost after six.
I work in the evenings, okay? I work
Yeah,
through the night,
you're on a
sometimes through the
different
morning.
schedule. You're a nocturnal animal.
God.
You know that owl life.
There we go. Yes. The night is my life.
Okay, so for the uninitiated, what exactly is Siriwatu? What's your elevator pitch for your story?
So, for those that don't know, I'm the creator of 002, the writer illustrator of 002, and 002 follows these four teenagers that inherited supernatural abilities from a secret empire that disappeared long ago. Now a quirky old man, as they're being hunted by the secret group known as the Iraq, so that's even more secret in the 002, are being trained by this quirky old man who wants to turn them into who he believes them to be, the descendants of the 002, which I call the Yaka. That's basically it in a nutshell. It's the best manga in the world, by the way, just saying. So you need to buy it when it comes out.
So how did your whole creation journey start? How did Awali Comics start?
Oh man, it took so long. So look, Siriwatu wasn't supposed to be a manga at the beginning. Obviously, it was always at the back of my mind, but I wasn't a skilled illustrator. And I knew nothing about manga or comics or anything like that in general. So about 10 years ago, maybe even more, I think it's just when I left high school. That was 10 years ago. So my uncle, who was a huge fan of everything animated, comics, manga, and everything at the time, saw a niche that didn't exist, which was in South Africa. We had nothing for these teenagers and students and children and the young adult that was catered towards what we went through as South Africans, or I guess Africans in general, and a story that catered to that for us, which was in the animated format. And he came to my mom's doorstep, and he approached me with this idea of, look, I want to create something that's like Captain Planet, because Captain Planet is something that he really liked, and he thought the messaging at that time, although it can be very cringy and cliche and all of that today, he had just had children, so he wanted something that spoke to them. I mean, obviously I took Serial in a very different direction, but at its heart, it still feels like something that is that strong. So over the 10 years, we developed a script and a screenplay that eventually became sort of like an animated clip, right? And we did the animated clip, and we never really put it out there. But we didn't know anything about the industry. We didn't know how to get things out there. We just made this thing that we really wanted to make. The character's not even dialogue. It looks a little like him. And eventually, I decided along the way that I actually wanted to make a storyboard. What's the word? I think it's a story. It's like the thing that you make before an animation, which is like the storyboards where you like illustrate.
It is the storyboard here.
It is a storyboard, yeah. I wanted to make storyboards for like a new animation, but that was specifically that had to do with the story that I had written for Siriwatu in a screenplay format. And what ended up happening is I worked with a friend of mine, and we illustrated the very first storyboard for this action sequence that we were going to make. That's part of the story of Siriwatu. And I thought the storyboard worked specifically well because it defined all the characters in my head, like how they are represented in the book, and it sort of gave a taste of what the world was like and what their power schemes are. And it's not directly what their power schemes are, but it gave a taste of what it is. And I liked the storyboarding process so much because it ended up looking like it was like manga panels in the first place, like as we had illustrated it. And then I just decided, look, I'm going to put my own money into it, and not very little at the time, but I will put all my money into it, and turn this storyboard manga-looking thing into an actual manga. And that was about 3 years ago, and it ended up looking really good to us at the time as a manga book. And it was at that point, I think it was 2016. Late 2016, early 2017, And we just discovered that there was no manga in South Africa at that point. No one had made manga, like an actual physical manga book, and put it out there and stuff. And ever since then, since 4 years ago, I decided to pick up my own ability, skill, and in everything manga related, and turn Siriwatu into an actual series of books that now is, to me, the best manga in the world. Or, even though there's only 6 more is coming out. But yeah, that's my journey into making Siriwatu in as brief a nutshell as I can put it, because I can speak for like 7 hours on everything.
How did you? So the other part of your life is that you're a history academic, a historian. How did you get into that?
Oh, that. I actually look, when I was going through university, I was in that phase like many other students where I didn't know what I wanted to do. But for some reason, even though I suck at everything when it comes to writing and academia and grammar, history was something that always fascinated me, because I mean, as a comic or mangaka, or as the new term is, Bongo creator, African creator, there's something about history that feels very silent in Africa, that isn't really well known or spread out as we know when we see on like TV and those type of dramas. We don't know much about it. So history always I was drawn to it. And for me, for example, I'm not someone that I don't think I'm smart enough, or I don't think I'm I don't know what's the word, well versed enough in everything in the world that I can say like this is the right political thing or whatever. And I always found that history, even though people say, even though everything is like political or whatever, I found that history sort of is, I don't know if it's more than that or less than that. I don't know how you would describe it, but I found that history was slightly different. Like it told the story, but it didn't tell you what to think, right? And so I was fascinated by that and all the stories that I didn't know about South Africa. And what ended up happening is, as I went further into historical studies, I found that my own heritage and history and culture and all of that kind of stuff could be discovered in the things that I was learning. And I always wanted to turn Siriwatu, and I always wanted Siriwatu to be a reflection of my, in some ways, not in every capacity, of the history of my own heritage and the people around me that I didn't know about. And so that became what Siriwatu eventually sort of evolved into. It was like sort of a mixture of like their own characters, they are their own personalities, their own real people, if I can put it that way. But there is lore, there is culture, there is heritage behind that, their own individuality, or that supports their own individuality. And so history became such an important supporting factor to the creation of Siriwatu. Even though it's a mythological thing, a fantastical thing, even though it's something you can watch without even caring about history, without even caring about maybe bigger questions or things like that. It's just something that I thought was interesting to add into something that I wanted to make very entertaining. Yeah.
So you mentioned it looked like a manga instead of a comic book.
Yeah.
In what ways is that Japanese type of culture influence Siriwatu?
So that's like, that goes back to it somewhat goes back to the question of history and origins and stuff like that. So again, I'm like the biggest Superman fan, hugest Batman fan, like a big fan of Spider-Man and those comics and stuff like that. But I found that the thing that really spoke to me, the style, the animation style, the way of telling a story that's more quirky, that's more over the top, but that's more flashy and at the same time gripping and deep, was the animated Japanese style. And I think most of the things that I grew up on, aside from like Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, was things like Naruto, Dragon Ball Z, Bleach. At the time, what else was there? Hamtaro. If anyone remembers Hamtaro. Those are the things that I grew up. Those are the things that I grew up and that I really enjoyed watching. And there was a fluidity in the animation style and the way of telling a story that spoke to me. And I think that's why Serial 2 moves more to a manga anime style. And in the latest issues, you get that feeling even more. Like it's even more sharp, it's even more gripping, it's even more. I think I'm just throwing words out there, esoteric. I don't even know what it means, but it sounds right. But yeah, so that's why I went with manga and Japanese style, because that speaks to me. It's how I grew up.
In what ways do you think, or have you experienced kind of African culture and history be similar to Japanese culture and history?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. It's actually not a difficult one. It's more like, look, in Japan, a lot of the ways, a lot of people don't like the whole cultural side of things. I mean, if you don't like that, I'm not. Zero Wars 2 is still for you. I don't care what you say. It's still for you. Go buy the book when it comes out. But essentially, Japanese culture it oozes through the manga and the anime that you see. It's like everyone's a samurai or ninja, or the buildings that they're in, or the background characters that exist, the way they respect the elders, or the way they treat each other. The fantasies as individuals are placed within the book. Obviously, all fantasies can't work in reality, but it can work in fantasy spaces, and you see that oozing in the animated projects. And with Serial 2, from the get-go, even before it was a manga, it was always something that we intended to have within the project that we were creating. I mean, the setting of Serial 2 is basically this fictional village called Chukuru, Camp Chukuru. And this, in our world, it's fictional. When we created this, I didn't know anything about an actual real Camp Chukuru. So there is an actual real Camp Chukuru in South Africa that does this very same thing that we, in our imagination, made up, which was act as a conservation site for South Africa, sort of like a place that like rescues rhinos and stuff like that. But in our universe, or in Serial 2's universe, Camp Chukuru is this conservation heritage site, which I consider like South Africa's like. So there's something that happened in South Africa, which is basically the government decided that they want the students of South Africa to learn more about South African history and the people within the world and what's happening in South Africa, right? In many ways. And one of the products was these heritage and conservation sites, where students go as like a summer camp, but then they learn about things in South Africa. They learn about animals. They get more in touch with more of the culture and heritage of South Africa. And where was I saying? Oh, and it's basically like those places like, you know, Langa and Khayelitsha and places like within Mitchell's Plain and certain towns that become like tourist sites, but mine is more like a conservation site. And in Camp Chukuru, what you see in there is a lot of South African references, which specifically, like, I am South African, so I specifically aim it towards like all the cultures out there, like West African, Indian, Tunisian, all of those type of cultures out there that is fantastical but also influences South African culture. And so, like Japanese culture, I find a lot of African mythology, folklore, cultures bleeding into the background, if I can put it that way, of Serial 2. Yeah, and it starts with like Camp Chukuru settings, where they come from as people, the language that they use, and they still speak English. So buy the book if you only listen to English manga, read English manga. But they also have like twangs and slangs and phrases that I grew up using, or that I also heard being used in the book as well. And it's not rare, but it's not used so much that you get confused. At least that's what I believe. So far, yeah. So it's easy. South African culture, history, all of that is similarly there as Japanese culture is there as well. Long story short.
That's cool. What's your favorite piece of African history? Like, what's your favorite moment? If you wish you could go back in time and witness.
Oh man, if I could witness a South African moment. Look, these things that I really wanna, that I really wanna, like, be. How do I put it? That I want to see, but if I saw it, I would die immediately.
Why is that?
I can't remember exactly. So I can't remember exactly the year it was. It was definitely hundreds of years ago. Maybe thousands. Maybe millennia ago. Millennia. Look, I'm an idiot with numbers and math. Don't trust. It's a very long time ago. But apparently, this goes back to kind of like world history, but it's also South African history. It's like looking back at like the ancestors of humanity emerging and existing. Maybe their final days. I think her name is Lucy. The skeletal remains of Lucy that was found. Like, I'd be fascinated of Lucy's existence, right? Or the meteor that hit also South Africa, apparently. And it's. I don't know the full story behind it because I'm not wrapped up in ancient history, but there was a meteor that hit South Africa that is also said to be important to the origins of life, if I'm not mistaken, or at least that's the rumor. More recent history that I'd be fascinated in. This is more, I don't know if it's considered dark history. I mean, I guess it is dark history, but my family, for example, comes from District 6. Like, some of them come from District 6. They lived in District 6 for a while. And I'd be fascinated to see what life was like back then. Before, like, the Group Areas Act and all of that happened, because my aunt, for example, she existed in a space where she grew up next to white people and Indian people and black people. But then the Group Areas Act happened, and then everyone had to split up. It was a very interesting thing to me. What else is there? There's so much. The 1995 Rugby World Cup would have been interesting, I think, because, I mean, as tense as things are now between people sometimes, those first few years of South Africa, at least the way that things are expressed by some older people, is that it felt a little more calm. People were a bit more together. That would be an interesting time to re-experience. I mean, I existed, but I didn't really exist. I was like 3 years old or something. Yeah, exactly. And then another one would be actually, so the things that is expressed in Siriwa too, right, is something that is near and dear to me personally, but it's also near and dear to South African history. Like, it's actually something that I write upon itself. And my uncle, for example, he had a very interesting history as well. He was like chased by the police, he was exiled, he disappeared for a while, he was almost killed. I think he might have been tortured, I'm not sure. And I'd be very interested in getting to see that play out. It's really weird because, I mean, not that I want it to happen or anything like that, but it's something that I would be interested in seeing. So a lot of the things that I want to see is see the overly fantastical, like Lucy, or the origins of life, or the meteor that hit South Africa, to personal things like what my uncle went through. Seeing that and seeing some of the things that he went through would be some stuff that I would want to see. But then again, I can just speak to my uncle and he'll tell me everything.
It's interesting that you chose like a more personal moment, as well as like a generalized one. That's interesting. So you recently started a collaboration with Comic-Con Africa and their YouTube channel. Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Oh, that's really fun. That's really interesting to do. So with Comic-Con Africa, they wanted a program that speaks specifically to anime and manga and that collective of people. And I'd done a show with him before, like it was a live show, not a live show, the second one was live because of COVID, but I think the first one was live. We had done it in Comic-Con Africa. Actually, no, I did 3 shows with him before I started this thing. There was one where they didn't know any manga or anime people in South Africa, not like a lot of people, and the first name that came up was me apparently. And so I did a show with Viv Media. It's the American translator,
Viz Media.
the American company that translates Japanese books into English, Viz Media. And I got to sit on a panel with him and act as a sort of pseudo host, but also sort of being interviewed at the same time. That was the first thing I did with him, and then ever since then, Comic Con Africa sort of saw me as someone that they can speak to when it comes to anime and manga. And so the second time I did it was called anime Africans in Anime, right? And I was on the panel as sort of a host guest, right? And it was me and the guys at Afro Tokyo that were doing it. So Afro Tokyo is the guys that are doing manga and anime in Zimbabwe right now, and they're really, really good. They're three brothers, and maybe I think they might have other people as well that they work with. So a group of I know there's 3 guys, and then there's maybe more people with them. And so the two of us, we got to interview and speak to some huge people in the space that are doing things like African anime or African manga in all of South Africa, all of Africa. It was Black Sands, it was a Rocket Boy, who is also Cape Townian, and I think they're coming out with an anime very soon with Netflix. I'm not sure, but it looks really good. I'm blown away. Can't wait to learn from him and maybe one day work with him, hopefully. And we got to interview those guys, and Comic Con Africa really, the guys that were behind the scene, they really liked what we were doing. And then the second year was again Anime in Africa Part 2. And what was really cool, we got to do an online thing this time. So it was similar to this. Sorry, my voice. Where's my voice going? We did a similar thing where it was like an interview with Black Sands, with Black Sands and a few other African anime creators, and they really liked the way that we conversed, and so I really liked that as well. And so I approached Comic Con Africa with this. So sorry, we approached Comic Con Africa with this idea that we want to do this for you on a more regular basis, right? Like an animation based on anime, based on maybe Africans also in anime. That's more than just the guests that we got for these panels. And what it eventually evolved into was a show, or that we wanted to evolve into, is a show that relates strongly to the anime manga crowd. And we ended up releasing our first episode, I think about 3 months ago. And ever since then, it's been very exciting because I get to play around. I get to make interesting content for viewers, and I get to play around with it because I sort of have an excuse to be creative, which is really cool.
For sure. Check it
Anime
out.
Manga
Check it
Otaku
out
Show.
on Comic Con Africa's
All in the
YouTube
time.
channel. So, as somebody who, I think you've described yourself as like the first Afro-Manga, or at least one of the first afro-magaka, what advice would you have for budding storytellers who are trying to create an African manga or anime as they come up in life? What do you tell them?
As an African mangaka, look, if I'm speaking to everyone in general, right, I'll say there's no money in it first. First and foremost, this like unless you are the Game of Thrones guy, George R.R. Martin, and you decide, okay, I'm gonna become an African, get an African nationality, and then I'm gonna create African manga, and baby, you'll get like millions and millions of rands and dollars and stuff immediately. Right? It's if you become an African manga, African anime creator, the first thing that's gonna happen is you're gonna become part of a community of people, not just me, that are pushing it forward to make something of it, right? And then eventually you're gonna. The hope is, and I genuinely fully believe in this, is that your book, right, is gonna become something eventually and hopefully very soon, right? So the advice is not to expect the world, but to do it because you want to do it. And the second thing is, what was the second thing? I know I had a second thing. Right here, sorry. my purest form of writing anything is something that you want to see, something that entertains you. Write that, right? And as African creator, we know, and it's not for everyone. Obviously, some people just want to write for entertainment's sake. But it's always good to look into your own personal history. And the story doesn't have to be about you. Sometimes a story can be weak because it's about you, but it can be very strong if it's something that you know well yourself, that you can easily write about. Don't try and follow a trend that is either, how do I put it, Japanese based or American based because their stories work. The reason why your story will work is because it's a story that only you can tell, or that only a collective that's similar to you can tell. So write your own stories is basically what I can say to budding African mangakas, or anybody in general. Write your own story.
Thank you so much for joining on the show, Ziyaad. It's been fun having you.
It was awesome chatting to you, Johannes, about Studio 2, about me a little bit. It's very difficult for me to condense everything that I always want to say in like 30 minutes or less. But thank you, it was awesome.
Sure. Why don't you let everybody know where they can find your work on the internet?
Ooh, that's going to be a difficult one. You can find my work at several different spaces. But I guess mostly for my personal stuff, you can find me, my Facebook on Awali Comics. You can find my YouTube on Awali Comics. But I also have a I don't want to call it a private channel, but it's a more experimental channel that I'm going to be working on, which is just called Awali. I have 6 subscribers on that, so it's going to be very hard to find that one. Then there's Twitter. You can find me on there as Manga Ziyaad. On Instagram, Awali Comics. I'm also going to be starting to stream on Twitch with a few friends, including Yanis. On a channel also called Manga Ziyaad, so that's also probably going to try a lot of experimental things on there as well. And then you can find me on Comic-Con Africa. I release an episode, or we are releasing an episode every month. It's manga anime related, sometimes African anime related, sometimes out the anime related. So like our next episode will be Digimon related episode, for example. So yeah, you can find me on Comic-Con Africa under the banner of Anime Manga Otaku, host of. Yeah.
Ooh, sounds good. Otherwise, cheers.
See you, Jonas. Bye.